Okay, hello YouTube. Today I'm just going to do a video on number one, this endgame that just came up in the World Championship match. It was the 14th game of the World Championship match, and Ian Nepomniachtchi was playing black, and Ding Liren was playing the white pieces. And I also just want to discuss kind of what I think is relevant information or relevant knowledge when you're trying to study and when you're trying to learn about chess. And I think that's something that's really important, and it's a question that I get asked a lot by players is what should I study and what parts of the game should I study? Basically, we have this end game where, black is going to be slightly better here, pretty much no matter what. And the question is kind of what should black's strategy be moving forward if he wants to press for a win? And of course, what should white's strategy be if he wants to try to get a draw? And the position is actually just much more complicated than it looks like on the surface. It's not simple or straightforward, where, white is definitely getting a draw here, and it's super, super easy. But when they were doing the broadcast, a lot of the people that were watching just kept saying it's a draw, it's a draw, it's a draw, because, of course, they're looking at the engine readout, and the engine is telling them it's a draw, so they think that it's a draw. So let's just talk about this position, and let's just kind of digest it. So what should black's strategy be? Well, generally speaking, like, best practice in a position like this is to advance this pawn, usually to the 6th rank, but not the 7th. And the reason for that is there's a lot of scenarios where your king will actually run towards that pawn, and it'll eventually try to find a place to hide on the a2 square, for example, and it can hide in front of that pawn, and there's tons of scenarios where those positions are wins for black. So just in general, that's the strategy. You want to push that pawn to a3, but no further, and then you want to hide your king in front of the pawn, and that's how you're going to attempt to play for a win. A lot of different formations in this position, like if the pawns end up on the same side of the board, are just known to be draws. So like if you exchange the a pawn for the e pawn, that 3-on-2 is known to mean a draw. If you exchange the a pawn for the h pawn, that 3-on-2 is also known to be a draw. And of course, if you end up with the f pawn and the h pawn by themselves with no other pawns on the board, which is another possible scenario, that position is kind of known to be a draw. So what's interesting is kind of how much information do you need to play this position correctly with both sides? And that I think is an interesting question, because in reality, you don't actually have to know if this position that we're looking at right here is a draw or a win. You don't have to know that. I know that sounds weird, but you don't have to know that. And that's something where, like, there's actually so many exceptions to endgames and they don't come up very much, that's actually a piece of information that you're going to have to refresh over and over again as you advance as a player. That's a piece of information that you kind of have to relearn over and over again. Whereas the information that's going to be constant is what is the best general practice here to play for a win, and what is the plan moving forward. Like, learning the plans are more important than understanding the absolute evaluation of the position, which can change pretty drastically just depending on very small changes in the position. Like, if this pawn had been on e6 instead of e5, it's very likely that this position is now winning for black instead of just being drawn. Or if you take this pawn and move it over a file, this position is probably winning. Just moving that pawn over a file, and it becomes almost a clearly winning position for black. So very subtle differences in the position can change the overall evaluation, but in general, the plan isn't going to change very much. The plan is going to be very similar if you understand the plan and you understand the ideas. So that part of understanding the end game is never going to change, whereas learning the evaluations of every single possible scenario, where, like, the pawn is on h6, the pawn is on h7, you have a pawn on h6 with the pawn on e6, you have a pawn on e5 with the pawn on h6, and then learning the overall assessment of this position is winning, this position is drawn, that's probably a waste of time, because there's so many different positions that are possible in chess. There's more positions in chess than atoms in the known universe, and there's going to be, hundreds of thousands of permutations, probably even thousands of permutations just of this particular end game. It's completely pointless to learn whether all of them are winning or all of them are drawn. Basically, as white, what you're trying to do is you're trying to find some sort of fortress where you can create an infinite number of checks, you can force a favorable exchange of pawns, and where you can shuffle your pieces in a way that black can't make progress. That's what white's trying to do. And what black's trying to do is he's trying to advance his pawn to the 6th rank and possibly find shelter for his king and avoid all those scenarios that he knows are going to be a draw. Now, as it turns out, that this did turn out to be a draw, but Ian Nepomniachtchi did end up going down the path that I ended up suggesting, which was just moving the pawn to the 6th rank, but no further, and then just trying really, really hard to win the position from there. And he created tons and tons of complications and had a lot of chances, and at no point was the defense easy for White, but White did eventually hang on to the draw, but he had to really, walk a tightrope to get there. It was very, very complex, and he eventually even ended up with king and rook versus king and rook and f and h pawn, which is again not always a draw depending on the scenario. A lot of specifics come into play even with that. So what is it that we need to learn when we're learning chess, and what is it that we need to avoid? We don't need to learn the absolute evaluations of every single permutation of every single endgame. We just don't need to do that. We need to learn the general rules and the general principles, and that's the permanent information that's going to stick with us for a long time. And the same thing is true with the openings. A lot of people say study the endgames because endgames are permanent, but openings are temporary. But that's not the entire story. There's a lot of stuff in the openings that are permanent, and there's a lot of stuff in the openings that are temporary. And for most people, when they discuss the opening, and I'm just going to switch over to this other board here to discuss an opening experience that I have, for most people, when they discuss how people shouldn't study opening theory, one of the things that they go into is they say, well, opening theory is always changing. That's sort of true, but for most people that ask me should they be studying openings or shouldn't they, they're at such a beginner level that to get to the point where they would be in a position where they would have to worry about opening theory changing it's mind-boggling to me, because like these people don't even know how to play the first 6 or 7 moves of an opening, and for the most part just developing your pieces, getting your pieces into the game, those ideas, those principles, those exact moves, they're not going to change very much. Pushing yourself beyond that point of preparation. I had an experience where I was playing in a tournament in Chicago, and it was a Masters only event, and I ended up getting into trouble in a Sicilian defense with some home preparation. It was like after e4, c5, knight c3. It was a closed Sicilian, and this was kind of the topical rage back then, was to play this early rook b8 followed by b5 and knight d4 and then b4, and then here I played this move queen a5. Now the whole point of queen a5, and it was supposed to be kind of theoretical at the time, was it's to meet c3. So the idea is if they play a move like c3, you're going to have dc3, bc3, knight c6, and then when they play d4, or more importantly, the idea is they can't play d4 because now you have this pressure on the queen on d2. So like if d4, you would have cd, cd, queen takes d2, bishop takes d2, knight d4. So the whole concept is that you've effectively prevented their main means of counterplay by preventing c3 and d4. So that's the idea behind queen a5. But of course, this move after queen a5, the move a3 is certainly possible. And I knew even at the time, like, that I was coming up with this preparation, I thought to myself, c3 doesn't seem very logical, a3 seems a lot more logical. So I actually put this on a computer engine and I let it run, and I just went out, had a bite to eat, I came back. Now back then the engines weren't as strong. I was using some version of Fritz back then. I think I was using like X3D Fritz. And it just shot out the move. It said queen a4, it said, yeah, queen a4, and it just said equality, and I was like, okay, fine, whatever. And I believed it, because I didn't know any better. And I went and I played this in the tournament. I played queen a4. That was the end of my preparation. And after b3, queen a6, bishop takes d4, which is a move I completely missed. And I think the engine at the time also completely missed it, is the point. And then cd4, knight b2. My position was completely lost. B takes a3, knight c4, a2, knight c1. So, I mean, we're deep into the preparation here. Like, we're 16 moves in, to get to this position, and of course I'm completely lost. And the reason I'm also completely lost is the reason I had trouble with this preparation was I'm playing a position that's also inherently risky. So, like, when you're preparing openings, what you have to do is you have to prepare to the complexity of the position. And so the second I play a move like queen a5, I'm already playing a position that's really complex and very dangerous, because I haven't castled yet. So if I were to just play this like a normal, closed Sicilian, if I hadn't played this early rook b8, b5, b4, and all these non-developing moves, if I just played something like e6 or knight f6 and castled, that's going to require a lot less preparation, and I'm going to get to a safer position much sooner, and then I'm just going to be able to play chess, and there's going to be very little risk. by playing this riskier version of the opening, I'm going to require more preparation, and I'm leaning on that information to be accurate. And that's the type of opening preparation that can become pointless because it can get refuted. We can come out with better computers. Bad things can happen to it, and you can end up getting into trouble. So when you're getting into these complex, specific positions, then you're probably studying the opening too much. But if you're just memorizing the first, 10, 12 moves of an opening just to get your pieces out and get castled, that's going to be universal. You're going to be able to use that knowledge for the rest of your chess career. So for most players out there that are, playing chess like between the 900 and the 1800 level or 2000 level, the learning the opening probably is not hurting you because you're probably not going all the way to move 16, move 17, and then having somebody come up with a novelty that they generated with their computer at home. So that's probably not an issue at that particular level, and that's the only place where your opening knowledge is going to be too much. But you can have you can overstudy your opening in a sense, and you can overstudy your endgame in a sense when you're an up and coming player by focusing on the changing aspects of either one of those things. So like if you're just obsessing over knowing absolutely each and every single endgame position and knowing the evaluation, knowing whether it's winning or losing, that's a total waste of time. And if you're studying the opening out to move 17, 18 in specific lines, but you're not learning all of your general plans, also a waste of time. So that's kind of the balance that you have to strike. And even at the highest levels, like if you take this position from Ian Nepomniachtchi's game, I don't think either player knew what the overall evaluation of the position was. I don't think they knew if it was a draw or a win for sure. I think each side was just playing for their respective result. Nepomniachtchi was playing for his win, and Ding Liren was playing for his draw, and each of them was just trying to make progress in that direction and trying to get their result, and then just let whatever the natural result of the game is supposed to be work itself out in the end. So anyways, I hope you found this video helpful. I hope you found the information useful. I hope you learned something new about chess and can use some of these ideas in your own games. Thank you very much for watching.